are very, very fortunate to have a very special man, Mark McLaughlin, with us. Mark is a Tahoe historian and an award-winning, nationally published author with 6 books and more than 650 articles in print. He was educated as a cultural geographer and historian at the University of Nevada, and his work appears regularly in California and Nevada media. He has received the Nevada State Press Award 5 times. Mark has lived at North Lake Tahoe since 1978. His love of snow and mountains lured him there when he was 20 years old. When he was 20 years old, he moved from Philadelphia, where he grew up, which happens to be my hometown. I guess there wasn't enough snowfall in Philadelphia.
This year there was.
Especially this year. So Mark went west. He has delivered more than 1,000 presentations, has been a frequent guest on National Public Radio, has appeared on CNN, the Weather Channels, as well as several historical documents. Please give Mark a warm Sun City welcome.
Thank you, Deborah. Well, I appreciate you folks taking some time out of your perfect part of the day to be indoors. So keep this right around an hour if I can. I have slowed my cadence over the last 4 or 5 years, but I do like to get a lot of information out there. And that's why I think one of the reasons why Deborah asked you to hold your questions to the end. With any luck, I might answer them during the course of the program. But once again, thank you for coming. I really do appreciate it. And, you know, this Donner Party story is iconic. I've already done a program with the History Channel that we did with the Donner Party. I've done a Weather Channel program that we did with the Donner Party. And now the History Channel has now just contracted another film production company in LA to do another whole feature Donner Party documentary. I'm like, unbelievable, man. But anyway, it is a very good story. There's a lot of real interesting things other than the aspect of cannibalism. I think that's what gave the story such, you know, such dramatic impact over time and in all the writings about it. But there's really a lot more compelling information and stories about actual people, because no matter what you might want to think about it, 1846 isn't that long ago, and these people were pretty much just like us, making tough decisions in a tough situation. So before I get any further into that, I'd just like to move forward into the program. The first thing I'd like to talk about, as you can see in the caption here, Thomas Jefferson's the 3rd president. He's elected right around 1800. We're starting to look further west, past the Appalachians, past the Mississippi, and it was all unknown land for the most part, and a large chunk of it was owned by France. So Jefferson makes the deal, he signs the deal with France, they get the Louisiana Purchase. We double the size of the United States. So now we're going to include all the Rockies and everything else. We're going to send out Lewis and Clark to give us some kind of idea what might be out here in the now, which is part of the United States, because we legitimately bought it from France. And ultimately, when President Polk is going to run for election in 1844, his platform is American expansion and land acquisition. And you know, everybody knew that Mexico owned California, which was the crown jewel of the whole idea, but California and also what becomes Nevada and Utah and Arizona and New Mexico and a large chunk of territory. Of course, Indians are throughout the region and had been for thousands of years, but this is going to be part of this idea of manifest destiny. It has this very American idea. There's a religious component. There's a sense of exceptionalism about the American people. So whoever's there now, too bad for you, because we're coming. And one of the things is, we'll wait till that goes away. I don't know what that was. So here is a map Now, this map is legitimate, and it's from 1826. So it's just 20 years before the year of the Donner Party migration. And maps don't change super fast, because you need somebody out there doing surveying and everything else and bring it all together, all the information, write it up, bring it back to Washington, D.C., get a cartographer to lay it out, then you got to publish it and you kind of try to disseminate it. The stuff wasn't happening super fast. So this is a map that's at Yale's library that I managed to acquire, and there's two things about it that are interesting. One, when you're thinking about coming west, you see all these rivers that seem to be coming from what today would be Nevada and the Utah, because here is the Rocky Mountains. We have that part correct. And part of the early idea was this river San Buenaventura, a river of good adventure. And if we could bring wagon trains, and these wagons are coming out with families. We're not thinking of a gold rush, Yahoo, get rich. This is Americans coming west to build churches and schools and settle and make it America. So the idea was you could come out to some of these large lakes here, convert your wagon to a boat, and run the river. This is the Buenaventura that runs right into the Bay of San Francisco. So it would run for like 800 miles, and you would just cruise your way to the coast instead of the arduous wagon route. And in fact, they said that Buenaventura River, we know how arid the Great Basin is. It's the driest part of the continental United States, right? We know how dry it is. They said it had 2 times the volume of water as the Mississippi, where it discharges into the Gulf. So not even a clue. And the other part that's kind of wrong is that there's no Sierra Nevada mountain range. And that becomes an issue when you're coming west in a wagon. And in fact, we're going to learn in 1844 by a topographical engineer, a guy named John Fremont, that the mountains along the west block off any rivers from coming out of this interior zone. And it was John Fremont that named it the Great Basin, because the water flows in and very little ever comes out. I think it wants me to do it this way. Maybe it doesn't want me to do it at all. Hang on, I might be able to just use the keyboard. It seems to be locking up somehow. Any of my tech guys have an idea? Enter key? Yes? No? Voila. Enter key got rid of that arrow in the middle. Maybe that was it. One of the big draws was a guy named John Sutter, Swiss national, who had escaped debtor's prison in Europe, came to the United States, reached California in a very bizarre way because he used the Oregon Trail out to the Pacific Northwest. Then he sailed on a boat to the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, and from there to come back to California, which was always his destination. You could have to follow these trading routes. California and Russia and the Hawaiian Islands did a very strong trade in the Pacific, Central Pacific. So you lead the Pacific Northwest. You don't come right to California because there wouldn't be no ship. You go all the way to the Sandwich Islands, and then on the way back, you go up through Sitka, which becomes Alaska later, and then down that way, following the prevailing currents and the winds because of the sail ships. He reaches California. He negotiates a deal with the Mexican government. They give him 2 large land grants, the most important one being where the city of Sacramento is today, at the confluence of the American and Sacramento rivers. He had told the Mexicans, I am going to protect that interior area because there was no Mexican present at the time. And he says, and I will keep those Yankees at bay. I will keep an eye on them. As soon as he signed off the deal and got the land, he immediately put the word out that he's open for business with Americans to want to come out and buy land and live in the southern Sacramento Valley. So he's going to be a big draw because he's showing this support. He's got jobs for people if you need it and that kind of a thing. Gentleman on the left is Elijah Stevens. Had another guy with him named Caleb Greenwood. They are leading a group of 50 people. We call it the Stevens Party. This is the party that comes out in 1844. They reach California with all 50 people. They bring their wagons over Donner Pass, well, half of them anyway, about 5 of their 11, and 2 babies are born on the route. So, no fatalities, 2 more babies. They get into California, that opens up the trail. Because people had made it before by coming across the interior part of the country in what is today northern Nevada and getting to California, but they never were able to bring wagons. And because this is the day before railroad, if you're coming out as a family unit, you can't just come out with a pack animal. You have a lot of stuff, plus your kids and everything else. That's why you need a wagon. And Stevens was a great captain for the group and very successful. The mountain man that they were using, that guy Caleb Greenwood, he happened to be 80 years old at the time and would still become part of a Donner Party rescue even when he was 82. And the reason they were able to find the Truckee River and then find Donner Lake and then Donner Pass is because this guy, Chief Truckee, a friendly Paiute Indian, saw them trapped at the corner of a desert and gave them the directions to cross and to reach the river that they would follow up to hit the pass. And due to their gratefulness and the fact that this Indian kept saying the word Truckee, 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 they thought that that was his name, so they named the river for him. Turns out, we find out later, that wasn't his name, but when he says Truckee, he means everything's gonna be okay. You guys are gonna make it. So that's our most important river out of the 3, Truckee, Carson, and Walker rivers. And it's named after the Indian chief who kept saying, it's going to be all right. You guys are going to make it. I think that's a great little story. They did have to deal with pulling their wagons apart in pieces and bringing them up over the summit. And that was a real bear, and they decided they wouldn't do that anymore. And the other thing is, you think about it, these people are coming from back east, right? There's trains back east, and there's all kinds of industrial development and stuff like that. There wasn't even a wheel with spokes in California until 1841, and everything would have looked like this: solid wheels just cut out of a tree trunk and then a hole cut in the middle for the axle to go across. It just shows you how primitive, and we could talk about that for a long time, why California fell into this sucker hole while the rest of the world was going through all this development. And much of it has to do with geopolitics between Spain and Mexico and the way that they were distracted from it. And Mexico itself, when they got their independence, and they wanted to send Mexican nationals up into California, Alta California, nobody wanted to go. It was like, man, who wants to go up there? Times have changed. This is one of the main families out of the 3 families that we're going to talk about out of Springfield, Illinois, which kind of sets the core of this Donner Party story. James Reed and his wife Margaret were one of the 3 principal families, with George Donner and his wife and kids, and his brother Jacob and his wife and their kids. And they all have some money, so they're able to gather together all of their resources. Each family brought 3 wagons. Most families who were coming out in this migration of 1846 only had 1. So sometimes you'll hear about historians make them seem like superior or anything. I don't get that. I do get the fact that they might have had a little bit more wealth than the average family. And it wasn't that they were ostentatious, it was they were able to just bring more resources to the challenge. And there's a whole story about James Reed and the Pioneer Palace car, and it was a double-decker affair. And the fact is, we really don't think it was a giant double-decker affair. He was a woodworker amongst his other skills, and he put, like the things you see in the back of a pickup truck when a guy's going to a construction job, he's got his tools in that chest. He put those chests on the outside of the wagon above the wheel, so it makes the thing look real muscular and real bulky, but it wasn't like too far out of control or anything else like that. And they're all part of this idea of coming west to build up America. And out of this year of 44 with the Stevens Party, we only had 50 people. And then in 45, we only had about 45 people. This is the year of 1846 where 1,500 people are going to leave, some to go to Oregon country, some to go to California. All right, you don't have to bother reading it. Basically, the gist of this is the advertisement that George Donner put in the paper, because he was a 60-year-old man, His wife, Tamsin, was 45. His brother was younger, but sickly and ill. Part of the reason he's coming to California, where the climate is so salubrious, it's free of serious disease, was part of the compelling nature. So we see that party of 44 take their wagons apart and hoof their way up over the mountains. And when the word got back that wagons hit California, it's like everybody and their mother can come now. You know, it's like a real big breakthrough. And then it'll get shut down because the Mexican-American War is going to break out. Part of the problem is you can stay on the straight trail. You take the Oregon-California trail were combined, and then eventually they would split. But one of the things that was going to come up in this migration of 46 is the opportunity to take a very little used shortcut that most people this migration laugh at and decide not to do it. But the Donner Group, they end up taking it. And the pathway is being promoted by this guy, Lansford Hastings. Now, he's an attorney from Ohio. Just because he's a lawyer doesn't make him a bad guy right away. But the fact is, so he comes out on the Oregon Trail in the 1840s. He runs into John Sutter, who's got his fort. He's like, well, this guy Sutter's no genius, but man, he's got a nice setup here. He himself gets a little land grant down by closer to where Stockton is, in the southern part of the Delta. And he wants to put something up that he calls Montezuma and bring Americans out. And just like Sutter thinks, Sutter wants to be king of his own republic. Hastings has the same kind of ambition, to be president of something. So he says, all right, I got a piece of land, but I have to go back and advertise it and market it because no one's coming yet. He comes back east, he writes a book, The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California, self-published. He goes out, he starts doing speaking engagements and selling the book and getting people fired up about coming to California. Not so much Oregon, but more California, where his land grant is. He makes his way back east. He reaches at the middle part of August of 1845. He gets to Manhattan, and he's pitching his book. He runs into some guy named Sam Brannan, who's a pretty high player in the Church of Latter-day Saints with Brigham Young. Sam Brannan is outfitting a ship for about 250 Mormons. And they're going to leave New York and come all the way around the Cape and then come into the West Coast. Where? They don't know yet. But they're just all trying to get away and find a more remote zone because of the religious persecution that the Mormons were undergoing. Hastings says, everybody's welcome on my land grant. I've got no issues with various religions. So Sam Brannan's like, okay, well, we're going to be leaving here in September or October or something like that. We'll probably be in California by next spring. And Hastings is like, wow, these 250 people on this ship, plus all the other people I talked about in all these audiences, and everybody's all gung-ho about going. I better get back there and be there when they show up. So in August of 45, him and about 20 guys get on horses, no wagons or anything. They're going to make time. And they just go racing out to California. They cross Donner Pass right before Christmas, and it was still clear of snow. And they get down there, and Sutter remembers Hastings from a few years before. He says, Hastings and his men arrived today. They will spend the winter at the fort. They made it 2 days before the pass closed for the season. If they had been a week later, the odds of them getting over the mountains would have been very low, and he might have become just a footnote in history. Anyway, he is now prepared in the spring of 46 for this huge western migration, and he heads west to get to the point to promote a shortcut which he had never seen, but figured from a little bit of the notes that John Fremont had mentioned that it's probably a straighter route. And you know what? As the crow flies, it is. But this is the day where all of these westward trails followed streams and rivers. You needed the water for your oxen, your livestock, and for you. This is going to be a desert crossing, which is going to come very highly unrecommended by almost everybody else. And because I'm not going to have time to come back to Hastings, really, I did want to point in a little bit, I put in Brazil there. That's my postscript about this guy. So the Donner Party is going to run into all their problems. The Hastings cutoff is never going to be adopted by wagons. None of these things. California becomes a war zone in 46. The government, the American government comes in. We win the war in 48. Game over. There's not going to be any republics or presidents. Now it's just going to be another state. So we go on forward into the Civil War. He is a Confederate sympathizer, picks the wrong side again. They lose, but then after that, there was a lot of Southern families that did not want to be under Yankee government control, understandable. And he goes to Brazil, and he gets land there, and his idea is we are going to set up plantation-style economy at the same latitude that's fostered cotton and everything in the American Southeast, but we're going to be south of the equator instead. And we can do all the same things, including slavery. And so he writes another book. The first one was The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. He writes the next book, The Immigrant's Guide to Brazil. And they set up these communities. He dies on the second ship leaving Alabama, and then he's just dumped at sea. There are still American communities in Brazil based on this early settlement pattern that he had started with a couple of other investors. They now all speak Portuguese, but every July 4th, they dress up in Southern Belle-style dresses, they play fiddle music, and they have barbecue. So some things never change. And we won't spend much time on this either. What I tried to put out is this is the main map and the main trail that everybody's using. And here, traditionally, you get to Fort Bridger. The mountain man Jim Bridger had set this up. And then you make your move to Snake River to get up to the Pacific Northwest, or you're going to go up just north of the Great Salt Lake and drop down to the Humboldt River across northern Nevada, which brings you to the Central Sierra, up and over and into California. Here is the Hastings cutoff. You can see it avoids the big detour to the north. It does go in a much straighter line, but you're going to end up traveling for long periods of time with absolutely zero water. And it just doesn't make sense. And this is the part that becomes the best way I like to describe Hastings, was that he was very much overconfident in his own abilities, and it really underestimated the challenge of the conditions and the topography and the hardship that these families who were going to listen to him are going to have to deal with. This is a great little side thing. So you have all of these people coming west this year. Well, there had been a bunch of guys hanging out at Sutter's Fort in the winter of 45 into 46. We already know Hastings was there. He brought in some guys with him. And some of these people are going to head back east. Like I said before, California was super primitive. No gold strike yet. Hardly anybody here. Get homesick. I'm out of here. I saw the elephant, is what they say in the gold rush. So they just start heading back. Well, we got a guy named Jim Kleiman. He's a mountain man like that guy Caleb Greenwood. Kleiman lives to be 93. One of these super rare guys that has a whole complete life, and doesn't get killed or drink himself away or any of the other things that the mountain men would run into. So he happens to be heading back that year too, but he's eastbound and everybody's coming westbound. So he's saying how to do, as he's seeing people come on by. And I'm sure each evening when sun's going down, people have made camp, he just rides in, lays down his bedroll, says, can I share some coffee with you or whatever, and I'll be out of here in the morning. And then they chat it up, and he tells them about California. Well, one night he comes into this campsite. He doesn't necessarily know anybody, and he sees they're all sitting around the fire talking, and he walks up, and who jumps up out of it? Jim Reed from Springfield, Illinois. Reed says, Kleiman, is that you? And Kleiman says, Reed, what are you doing, going to California? That's crazy, And it turns out these guys had mustered together in the same regiment in the Black Hawk Indian War about 15 years before in Illinois, fighting Indians. So a bunch of guys in the regiment. So you have Jim Kleiman, James Reed, and some tall, skinny guy named Abraham Lincoln was also with them too. Now here's the thing. Kleiman, in the late 1820s, had circumnavigated the Great Salt Lake, knew it was just desert country. And when Hastings comes through it to see the shortcut before he gives his real pitch to everybody who is just west of the Great Salt Lake and just west of the Wasatch Mountains, mostly hanging out at Fort Bridger still, Kleiman goes with him because he's telling Hastings, you can't send families through this desert. It's a crazy idea. I'm coming in it just to show you how bad this is. So Hastings sticks to his guns, he still pitches it, and Kleiman's like, I'm out of here. And he continues east. So he runs into the Reeds and the Donners and everything. And he tells Jim Reed, he says, do not take the shortcut. I just went through it. I was on a horse. I made it. You won't. And Reed, and this is going to show part of his character flaw, he too is overly confident in his own abilities. He's really the de facto leader. We call it the Donner Party because George is elected captain because he's easygoing. He's not going to boss anybody around. But Reed is the main brains and the whole dynamo behind the core of this party from Springfield. And he says to Kleiman, he says, if that really is a shorter way, and I'm going to get in front of all those other wagons that are staying on the California Trail, and I'm going to be 3 weeks ahead of them, I can do it. And I'm sure Kleiman says, your funeral, man, and leaves in the morning. And here's the thing. You got a guy, these two guys fought together in war, had each other's back. Kleiman's a sober mountain man. He's literate. He's a novelty when it comes to mountain men. And he gives them the straight-up advice, and Reed turns them down, and they go in. That was a big mistake, in my opinion. So you had to follow in through the canyons of the Wasatch Mountains. You had to cross the desert. Reed loses 2 of his 3 wagons, including the big bulky one, and they left a lot of their possessions behind, and some people are just walking carrying their kids as they slowly try to get out of the desert. I showed you in the earlier map, that's the traditional route to a little trading post, and then down to the Humboldt, and follow that into California. Here's the shortcut, and see this extra detour here? That's because Hastings does take about 95 people in front of the Donners, and they get all messed up too, but he gets them out into the desert. The Donners are going to be 2 weeks behind on their own, and because they're only following the trace of Hastings' trail, the Donners are, they follow it verbatim. And instead of just jumping over a pass that Hastings should have known was there, going right from here, right to the Humboldt, he detours all the way around the Ruby Mountains, and the Donners do it too. So instead of getting 3 weeks in advance of everybody else, they fall 3 weeks even further behind, and now they're going to become isolated. So now we have the group, they're out in the middle of the Nevada desert, and this guy on the right-hand side, Charlie Stanton, says, you know what? We got all these kids. 50% of the Donner Party are kids under 18, a lot of families. He says, we got a lot of families here. We're running out of supplies. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to ride my horse to Sutter's Fort. This is way back, way back. I'm going to ride my horse to Sutter's Fort. I'm going to get supplies, and I'm going to come back for you guys. This is a single bachelor. He's like 34, 35. He's a businessman from Chicago. He's just looking out to start a business in California. He's got no relatives. No one believes he will come back. So the guy here on my right, Big Bill McCutcheon's got a wife and a girl, little daughter. She's 1.5. He says, I'll go with him, because Big Bill big is big, and Charlie was pretty small. The two of them have a much better chance to survive an Indian situation, and they go racing off to California. All right. Now Reed gets into a problem on his own. First of all, there might have been some bad feelings about his being very aggressively pushing the shortcut, which George Donner signed off on and says, yeah, if you think we should go, let's do it, man. We can make it. Well, they do make it, but they have a lot of problems. So now everybody's all worked up. There's a lot of tension and a lot of stress. We get into a conflict between 2 separate wagons. James Reed stabs this guy as a hired teamster named John Snyder. They weren't enemies before this. But Snyder's leading his wagon. Reed is down to 1 wagon after 3. So everybody's very protective of their stuff. The animals come together. They get tangled up. John Snyder starts going crazy with his bullwhip. Reed comes at him. Snyder hits him with the butt end of the bullwhip. Some blood comes down out of his forehead. He sees he's bleeding, flips out, stabs Snyder, kills him. So now people are like, string him up or let him go. What are we going to do? We'll like take care of him in California. They say we're going to banish Reed without a horse, without a gun, death sentence. Anyway, his daughter and another guy just come together and say, listen, we can't let him die in the desert. We'll have justice taken care of in California. They get some supplies for him, and a guy from Springfield, Illinois, who was a friend of Reed's, Walter Herron, another hired guy, goes out in the desert with the extra horses. He has a horse, gets one for Reed. They pack up. They go racing off for help to get more supplies, just like Stanton did. Okay, Stanton and Big Bill McCutcheon get to Sutter's Fort. John Sutter is pretty generous. He signs off. He says, I'll give you all of these supplies plus these 7 mules. He says, I want those mules back, though. I don't care about the supplies. You guys can pay me later. I want the mules back. And then Stanton says, okay, well, I'm going to start heading back up the trail. What happens? He comes back without Big Bill McCutcheon, the insurance policy, because McCutcheon is too sick to get out of bed. So Sutter puts another loan to Stanton, and he loans him 2 young Indian men, about 20 years old, Louis and Salvador. These guys are supposed to be the men that guide the party in because they're so far behind and they have no leadership, really. And so Stanton is coming back the mountains going eastbound now, and here you have Reed and Walter Herron coming westbound, and they pass each other, and Reed sees all the supplies. He's like, oh, keep going, Stanton. I'll be right behind you. We're going to hit the fort. We're going to get some stuff. We'll be right there. We're going to pull this off, man. Despite all of the stuff that has happened, it looks good. Bad news. The last week of March, pull in, it looks like it might have been about 5 or 6 feet of snow over the course of that last week. And yes, that's unusual. We know the year before, Hastings came over in the later part of December with no sweat. Now they're going to get nailed even before Halloween, just the way the timing was. And I put this 2004 up here in the corner because in 2004 in October, in the last 10 days of the month, we had about 6 feet of snow. So just to let you know, this isn't like some ancient climate. It does still happen. Well, now they finally get together. They're all, Stanton has come down with the supplies. Everybody finally comes up the Truckee River Canyon. They're making the way around. And when Stevens' party and Greenwood came through, Chief Truckee says, just follow up the river. Well, that's one thing to do on horseback, but if you're on wagons, the water levels are low. It's late in the summer. But the fact is, there's water there. The oxen's hooves get immersed and they soften and split, and the men have to push the wagons through the boulders of the riverbed. It was not a good route, but the Stevens party had no choice. The very next year, Caleb Greenwood, who had several different Indian female consorts in the West and a handful of sons and daughters around, well, 2 of them that had come out in 44 decided we're going to go back there in 45 and blaze a new trail. And where Verdi is, the town of Verdi, right on the river just west of Reno today, you detour there and you go north and come all the way around, then south to Donner Lake. So it's a big detour, but you avoid the Truckee River Canyon. And ultimately they do that and they make their way to Donner Lake. The vanguard of the party does, and they realize by looking up that they're going to have a really hard time trying to cross. So they make several attempts at the summit. They just keep getting turned back. And in fact, Jacob Donner, George's younger brother, I told you he was ailing before they started. Well, now he's not doing well at all. So George and his brother are falling further behind. So they are like 3 days travel behind the main party. So you have George and his wife and kids, and Jacob and his wife and their kids, and then their hired teamsters. So it might have been about 22 people out of the 81 that are going to get trapped. And they end up stopping at a place that we call Alder Creek. And they never make it further than that. And they end up trying to construct some branch teepee shelters against large trees and then taking the canvas from their wagons and throwing it over top. And so they're going to spend the winter in a much more primitive manner than the main group who's going to get trapped at Donner Lake, where they build cabins. And I told you that that Truckee River Canyon Trail changed and they made detours. Well, after Stevens' party came up, that taking the wagons apart, nobody wants to do that. So they blazed also in 45 another trail. That shows you this California trail is changing every year, getting better and better, still hard, but getting better and better. And they opened this thing, and today we call it Roller Pass. So instead of going up cliffs, Roller Pass is about, I guess it's about a half a mile or so south of Donner Summit, Donner Pass area. And instead of cliffs, you have a very steep grade that goes up and then drops down. So what you're able to do is take 10 or 12 yoke of oxen here and tie chains to their harness, and then put a couple of logs like here and maybe down here that the chains will roll over, roller pass, and pull the wagons all the way up to the top as the team goes down. And once you got the wagons up on the top, you unhitch and you start to bring the next one. You tie ropes to the back of the wagon. You take small saplings, aspens or small sapling pines. You stick those logs into the spokes of the wheels and you lock them up and you skid the wagon down on the west side. That was easier. And we still have Roller Pass today. They do try to make several attempts to get up and over the hill, and they really can't do it. Now, people in California are aware that this is a fairly large group of immigrants, most of them families, that have not made it. The only information they really have, other than what Stanton had given Sutter, was what Reed told them. But the thing is, and that's the thing, John Sutter says to Reed, how many oxen, how many livestock, what do you think they've got? And when Reed had left, he's like, oh, we have pretty good herd, this, that, and the other. Sutter's doing the calculation. He's like, you know what? They're trapped up there in the mountains. It's November now. They've got enough food for 4 months. Mexican-American War's happening. I can't get anybody together for the logistical rescue. It wasn't going to be 4 guys. There's almost 100 people up in the mountains. So nothing was coming together. And so the disconnect really is that after Reed has left the party, being banished, when they came further west along the Humboldt River, without Reed's leadership, they did not circle the wagons at night and post fires to illuminate and see what's around them and have guards to watch the livestock. The Indians see all this, first the Shawnee, then the Paiute, and they're subsistent level culture. They're living off of fly larvae and rabbits. They see an ox, it's like a McDonald's rolling by. So they're just shooting arrows at them like this. So when the immigrants get up in the morning, the livestock's laying there, weak from a loss of blood. They can't get up, so they're left behind. And because the Donner Group is now showing its vulnerability, you don't think the Indians are telling everybody up the stream? So by the time they get trapped in the mountains, they had very little in the way of livestock. And that is the big deal here. Ultimately, they're going to make up a couple of cabins that they're going to build at Donner Lake. They have a total of 3. One was there before. These are large cabins. They are no windows, but they have doors on either side. And that's because in the middle, they put another wall to make them into units. Because one of the things that happened in the shortcut process, you have the Corps from Springfield, Illinois. They know each other. They're Americans. They speak English. They might have all been Protestant for all I know. However, when they get caught up in the shortcut, all the other people that have been straggling on the trail that year, who are desperate to make up time, they too take the shortcut. Well, these guys are from all over Europe, and some don't speak English. It's a very different component, and there's lots of tensions building because of the lack of resources and who's going to share and how that's all going to work out. And it really isn't until the middle of February that we finally have the first rescues come in, and they don't even see the cabins until they see somebody climb up on a ladder next to the chimney and say, hey, we're down under here, because the snow was so deep. One of the things, William Eddy, who's going to be a major player, he arrives at Donner Lake with everybody else. They know they don't have any food. In Tahoe and Truckee, it's the same today as it was then. As soon as the snow starts to fly, all the deer go to the lower elevations. They can't hang out up there. And the bear go and hibernate. So there's no real game. I mean, you could try to fish, and they did, but if you read what they said, well, we came up to try to fish. They're from Illinois. The water's brown. You throw your worm in, and you wait, and you get something, right? Here, you go up for trout. Trout are just schooling right there. You go up like this. They see you. They're gone. You're like, what just happened? You got to be smart about this. Anyway, he shoots the bear, doles out as much of the meat. I think it was like 700-pound bear. So it was pretty good, but you do have a ton of people. And ultimately, Charlie Stanton, who has made it back and shared the supplies, he decides, we got to get out of here. We're not going to make it. He leads a snowshoe party of 20 people in the middle of November. They get up and over the pass, and they make their way over. What's he bringing back with him? None of the supplies that Sutter gave him. He's bringing back those mules, though, that Sutter had says, I want those mules back. So he's leading them along. Everybody else is just walking. No snowshoes. They're just walking on top of the crusted snow. Hadn't snowed for like 10 days, frozen over. They get all the way up and over. Now the afternoon sun, even though it's winter, the afternoon sun's starting to hit the snow, and the mules' hoofs are punching through, and they won't walk. And Stanton says, we got to go back to the lake. He says, I can't go to Sutter's Fort without his mules, right? Everybody's like, are you insane? He's like, this is a guy who keeps his word. They turn around, they go back down to the cabins, they hunker down. What happens? And within the next 3 or 4 days, they get like a 6-foot snowstorm. These guys would have been completely buried and done. They would have all lost their lives. So now they have to refigure out something, and Stanton says, you know what? In a few more weeks, when the next time there was a break in the weather, I will lead a snowshoe party out of here, and we'll start making snowshoes right now. And that's what they do. So at one point in later December, they calculate we have 15 pairs of snowshoes. We're going to take 15 people out of here, there's younger, stronger people who can do it. And we calculate it's going to take us 6 days to get from here over the mountains and down to the first eastern settlements in the Sacramento Valley. And from there, we'll turn the word out. If you guys don't send help, we're all going to die because we're starving here. This is a suicide mission. People are going, it's like, we're throwing everything out at this because we've got to do something for our kids. Well, they make their way up. Charlie Stanton is once again leading it. This guy is out of gas. He's been backing over the summit, doing all this stuff for people he didn't even know, no family members and everything else. He ends up dying there. He goes snowblind 3 days into this effort. He can't see, and he's also feeling weak. Everybody says, come on, man, we'll help you. He knows they only have about 7 days worth of food, that if they try to pull him along, it's going to take too long and no one will make it. He says, you know what? He's smoking his pipe next to the fire. He says, leave me here. I'll catch up to you guys. Don't worry about it. That's the last anybody ever saw him alive. This guy's a hero for me. I mean, he really gave of himself. The men start dropping on this trip. It's made up of 8 white men, the 2 Indian boys, Louis and Salvador, on loan from Sutter, and 5 women. And they are all sharing, just the little bit of food that they are going to be able to have that they bring with them, and they think it's 6 days. It's going to take them more than a month to do this trip. This is the most brutal part of the story. And one of the things, and I know this feels graphic, because I mentioned about this young lady, Sarah Graves Fosdick. And she ends up having, after her father dies and her husband dies, she has to eat their flesh, consume them. And the reason why I put this in, I don't like to talk about things in detail to that degree, but what you have to realize is when this is starting to happen, these people are delusional. These are not rational decisions. And the best way to think about it is, if you or I are out there and we go hiking and we get lost in the snow or in a cold rain, and now we're hunkered down and it's cold out, and we start to get hypothermia. right? And we're going to start to have problems with frostbite on our extremities, on our fingertips and our toes and stuff. That's because the body is going into an emergency level where we're going to focus on our brain, our heart, our lungs, our main cardiovascular part of us. We can get rid of a hand and an arm and a leg and still live and still make it. So they're not going to run into this. What's happening to them is long period of time with not enough protein. Their brain is shutting down, and the brain's going to start turning off the switches as it goes, just like the body does. And what's the first things it's going to turn off? The things you don't need. Ethics, morality, the stuff we're raised with. You're not born with it necessarily. And cannibalism is something we're taught, right? We're raised that it's a social, cultural taboo. And that's why you have to wait until your brain has shut that down. Now you're free to do things that normally you would have never done, but your body knows it needs something to eat to survive. And these people are going to push on through. Eddie's on this trip, and he looks into his little backpack. It turns out his wife had stashed a small parcel of the bear that he had shot. He thought that she had cooked it up and they ate it with the kids. They had 2 kids. But she had kept some of it for an emergency and put it into his backpack, and he finds it there. There is no evidence that Eddie shares any of that protein. He eats a little bit himself each day, keeps his strength up, and he keeps pushing the people, moving them forward as best that they can. Ultimately, they're crossing the western part of the Sierra. They've climbed down a canyon. They're below snow. They're in bushes, hanging from bushes and stuff. They're carrying their snowshoes because they don't need them. You get down to the deep river gorge. You got to climb up the next line, back into the snow again. Put your things. Unbelievable what they went up through. Ultimately, by the time all is said and done with this, out of those 15 people, only 2 males survive. All 5 females live. And that's because women they are superior in their physiology when it comes to famine and low temperatures. Women have double the subcutaneous fat layer than men. Not only does it give you somewhat of an insulative value against low temperatures, the body will slowly absorb it when it's starving and needs food. Women tend to work in cooperation. Men tend to work in competition. And women have a lower metabolic rate. Women are lighter in general than men. It was easier for them to stay on top of the snow with these crude snowshoes they made. All of these things came into play. And you see it throughout the whole demographic of the survival, but particularly in the snowshoe party, there was no shelter. They were all walking the same distance, doing the same thing. Because I used to teach this program we called Elder Hostel. You probably heard of it now. It's Road Scholar. And men would always say, oh, that's because the men are doing all the hard work and the women are just hanging out with the kids. Well, you just have to look at the snowshoe party and you realize, sit down, dude, you're wrong. Anyway, so out of the 2 men that survive and they make it, within a month, 2 of them are ready to go back into the mountains with one of the rescue efforts. And that is because they each had a child still left at the lake. James Reed ends up leading the second rescue party and everything else. He gets in there. He brings out like 20-some people in like a Pied Piper's list, many of them young, many of them children and stuff like that. And just to give you a sense, we have no thermometers from this event. Nobody's really measuring snow. But what we do know is when James Reed on March 4th is trapped up on Donner Pass with his 23 people that he's trying to rescue with no protection or anything, and a major storm comes in, it's very cold, trees get blown down, we have that part of it, that eyewitness account. Well, I found put it in my Donner Party weather book, the journal of a Dr. Marius Duval, who was a U.S. naval surgeon. This is during the Mexican-American War, right? He's on a ship anchored right off of Monterey. Soon they're going to be heading down towards San Diego and toward the naval blockade that the U.S. government's going to put on both coasts of Mexico during the war. But for this particular first week of March, he's right there at Monterey. And on the day that Reed's trapped on the summit, he's writing in there, miserable day, snowing on the beach in Monterey. In March. It was a cold storm. This guy, Patrick Breen, is the patriarch of a big Irish Catholic family of 9, him and his wife and their 7 kids. Well, when Reed's trying to get everybody out, once the storm breaks, it's like, let's go, we have no food, we got to make a run for it. Patrick Breen says, we're not leaving. We're going to wait for another rescue party because you've got nothing for us, Reed. You've got no food, you're just trying to make us walk through all this worse conditions. And Reed, who's doing the best he can, says, I can't help you if you're not going to come. If you're going to just stay by the fire, hopefully we'll see you later in California. Reed leaves. 5 days later, the third rescue operation shows up, and they come upon what we call the survival camp, and they look down. It's like 22, 23 feet at the bottom. They see the Breen family laying there with the fire had melted its way all the way to the dirt. And that shows you how deep that the snowpack was. And there was a couple people had died, not in the Breen family. They had died. There was evidence that their bodies had been used for food. So we have evidence that cannibalism occurred there. So nobody's making these conscious decisions. That's just when they're forced into the worst case scenario that you could imagine. And who's going to save the Breens? This guy, John Stark. He's like a quintessential mountain man. He's 6'4", 230 pounds, big, brawny guy. Nobody else in the third rescue party is going to help the Breens. 2 of them are fathers that are going to go down to Donner Lake to see if their kids are still there. The other 2 are able to grab a child, and it's going to be worth $50 if you bring a child out that's not your own as a rescuer, and you bring it out. These 2, both of the guys, so now it's one guy left, John Stark. He says, okay, Breens, I want everybody out of that hole. We're going to California. Picks up like 3 of the kids, starts kicking the rest of them along. He saves them all. He later becomes the sheriff of Napa Valley. He is another hero who risked his life for people he didn't know and did it. All the Breens survive. They moved down to San Juan Bautista because there was a mission there, and the Padre, they were Catholics, Irish Catholics. The Padre, Catholic, gives them a place to stay and everything else. In 1848, if you were in California, that was the best chance to make money in the gold because the gold rush kicks in 49. One of the Breens kids, he was like 15, goes out looking for the gold. When it starts finding it in 48, he scores like $16,000 worth of gold in like 4 or 5 weeks. Brings the money back. The Breens buy a bunch of ranch and agricultural land. They're still down there at San Juan Bautista today, and every so often, one of the Breens is mayor of that town. This guy, Louis Keseberg, probably one of the most educated guys. He was from Germany. He spoke several different languages and everything else. He's going to run into a lot of problems because what happens with him, he steps on a willow root at one point and it punctures his foot. And he is lame now. He can't travel. So when the final rescuers are saying, let's go, anybody who's going to try to come, because no one else is coming up for a while now, you got to come now, he says, I can't make it. He stays behind. And then what starts to happen is up at where the Donner families are, they're all dying or they're being rescued. Tamsen's husband, George, has hurt himself with an axe way back when they were first trying to create an encampment. He got blood poisoning from an infection. He got worse and worse and worse during the winter. Every time a rescue party showed up, number 1, number 2, number 3, they said, let's go, Tamsen. And as she got further along, they're like, you can't save your husband. He's barely conscious. He's not going to make it. And she says, I will not let my husband die without my comfort. So she turns them all away and ends up staying there until George dies. After he dies, she goes down to the Donner Lake encampment in a position to try to make it up over the mountains. She ends up dying there. This is what Louis Keseberg says. But the fact is, when the fourth rescue party, well, it's a salvage operation, and April shows up, Keseberg's the only guy alive. They said, "Where's Tamsin Donner?" He says, "She died." They say, "Where is she?" Because it was only a few weeks ago. And he had to admit that he had consumed her. And the thing about it was, to these guys, the snow was melting off, and now some of the lost oxen from the previous part of the winter had become exposed, and he still went ahead. This guy is out of his mind because of everything that he's been through. He makes it down to California. He lost 2 of his children in the ordeal. Him and his wife have like another 7 children. He goes in with Sam Brannan, the Mormon, who has decided to quit being a Mormon because he's found so much gold in 48 that he became California's first millionaire and didn't need religion anymore. And so these guys start a distillery and a brewery, and just as it's getting ready and everything else, the big flood of 1862 comes in and wipes it out and leaves them penniless. And so he ends up dying as an impoverished person, and his reputation was never able to come out of him being labeled the ghoul of Donner Lake or the Donner Party. Tamsin Donner does not make it. All 4 Donners perish, the adults, but quite a few of her girls make it in, and those girls make it to California and are adopted and raised. They get married, have normal lives. They have 17 children. So Tamsin, she didn't make it, but her children may bring in 17 more kids into California, which was the main thing. I just saw this at the old boat show in Carnelian Bay a couple summers ago, and you still see things about Tamsin Donner. She's used as a vehicle for this story in so many ways, because she was a school teacher, and that's what she wanted to do, open up a school in California. Trying to wrap this up, here we have James Reed and his wife Margaret. They kind of recovered decently. They were only the second family. The Breens live 100%. The Reeds live 100%. No fatalities. They make it into the Santa Clara Valley. And within 9 months of them getting there, Margaret gives birth to a baby. So they're in recovery mode now. And the other thing that's interesting about Mrs. Reed is one of the reasons that she wanted to leave Illinois was she suffered chronic migraine headaches. And California's climate, right? And the way the story goes is that once she made it to California, she never suffered migraines again. But I would say, once you've survived the Donner Party, you don't complain about a headache again, you know? And then we talk about the snow, cut off tree stumps. We have a new museum opening up at Donner Park this year, later in the summer. This pedestal, which is there, is 22 feet high, which is supposed to be indicative of the snowpack that year of 1847. In my analysis, I came in at 17, 18 feet. I'm not going to split hairs about 5 feet when we're trying to walk around and the snow is so much over our head. But, that's a part of how we try to figure it out. These 2 young ladies I work with on a dig up at Alder Creek, they were looking for the smoking gun that will scientifically prove, beyond all the eyewitness accounts and the people that admitted it, beyond that, scientifically proved that cannibalism occurred, but they were not able to find anything that said that at Alder Creek. And once they came out and says, we didn't find what we were looking for, the media took it to say cannibalism didn't occur, which are not the same thing at all. And really what they're looking for, they did find these bones because they're using lots of new high-tech stuff, scanning electron microscopes, detectors, things that hadn't been used before. And they're looking for, as I have here, these calcined bones. So what it is, you have to find either a human bone that shows knife work or a human bone that had been boiled. And we can tell when the bone's been boiled because it creates a surface to it, and that would have shown human consumption. None of these showed up. They found 16,000 pieces of bone. Virtually all of them were minuscule in size. Only 30 were large enough to test for DNA or by the scanning electron microscope. All of them were animals. One of the things that we come out of this was we found so many interesting other animal bones there around this hearth that they thought was the Donner encampment, that they were able to procure more food than we thought we gave them credit for, because there was all kinds of rabbits and squirrels and all kinds of things like that that they managed to hunt and eat. And it is still really like a big deal, this whole thing about cannibalism, but I feel that I hate this modern day revisionism or judging people based in the comfort of your armchair, and you really have to put yourself in the position of the victims to really be compassionate and understand what they went through. Nobody wanted this to happen. And here's the last two slides. This one is a great image from 1881, a guy named Nash, about Manifest Destiny. So if you look back east, you see New York with the bridge, and you see all the traffic in the rivers, and then the trains are even continuing to come west. So this painting goes from east to west in both direction and in time. We're going back in time as we go west. Even Tamsin Donner, who's forced into a wagon, had ridden trains for years back east. She was a teacher in Newburyport and everything else. So here you're coming west. The further back you go, before the train, we had commercial stages that were in operation. Before the commercial stages, you had the first pioneers and their wagons. Now you have the Indians, who are savages because they have no Christianity in their religion, and there's the bison, being chased into the darkness. And yeah, the sun comes up in the east, but that sun's it's not bright there and dark here because of the sunrise. It's there because this is Christianity. Oh, let me go back one second here. That's because this is Christianity enlightening the Americans, and this is the brightness they're going to bring as they convert all these different heathens, let's say, in the interior part of the country. And here comes the icon Columbia, bringing a school book for education, and she's stringing the telegraph. And once the telegraph goes coast to coast, you have instant communication across the country. And ultimately, this is the Oak Hill Cemetery in the Bay Area. Big Bill McCutcheon's in here. The Reeds are in here. A lot of the people of this story are in this. And the way I looked at it when I was there taking pictures, these are the monuments to my heroes and to these early pioneers. And these are the monuments to all of that effort and to that whole ideal of the American way of life and bringing it to a very primitive place. And I'm done. Thank you for your patience. I hope you enjoyed it. Questions? Yeah.
Could I see some hands from people who would like to ask a question, and I'll pass the microphone. Let's start on this side over here.
Got a woman in the back
Mark covered
there.
everything pretty well.
No, we got a woman far in the back.
Yeah, far in the back, okay.
Second row from the end.
Okay. Stand up so I can see you better. Thank you. Got you now.
Hello. I was wondering if you had more information on the new museum up in Truckee and
Well-
exactly, because I heard a year ago it was going to open.
Sure. It's California. It was done last summer. And what I was told was this winter and this spring, they're putting in all the exhibits. That was what needed to be done. I don't think it's open yet. I haven't been over because I book tours and I take people, groups on things. So I will know as soon as it happens. I don't think it's open yet, but that's what I've been promised, that should be open this summer. And it's going to be much different than the other one besides in scale. It's going to have to do a lot more with the evolution of transportation over Donner Pass, including the Lincoln Highway and everything else. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. I am.
Could we interrupt here?
Oh, yes.
Hi, Mark. I am on the Sierra State Parks Foundation
Oh,
board.
okay.
I'm Rosie Smith, and I do know that the museum will probably not be open until December or early January of 2015.
Really?
Excuse me, yeah. Because, again, they ran into some problems. I'm not representing the state
Okay.
here, but we did run into some problems. They are working on all of the displays. We will have an empty museum party on August the 16th. And if you want to find out more information about that museum party, it certainly helps to support, what we want to do is support the interpreters and the people that will be working in the museum for years to come. So that's what it's all about. You can find us on the Sierra State Parks information site. We have a website.
Thank you for that update, even
You're
though
very-
it's very disappointing.
It is disappointing. We are disappointed.
I just committed to my annual historic bus tour for the North Lake Tahoe Historical Society. I try
Yeah.
to give these, fundraiser bus tour, and it was all centered around going to the new museum and everything in August. So,
Better look at, well, you can come to our open museum.
okay. Well, thank you very much
Thank
for
you very
that.
much, Jose.
So I guess we have to be patient.
Bruce, you have any questions over there?
Oh, got a gentleman right here.
Yeah, I was wondering, old Route 40 that goes up out of Truckee and goes to the pass, was that possibly one of the routes that they took up? Or what were the routes other than over where Roller Pass is?
Well, the thing about it, first you have the Stevens Party that would go right up by the old highway at the lowest part of the thing. And that old highway started on the south end of the canyon and made its way to the north end, because when you're on the south end of the canyon and the sun's in the winter, it was always in the shade and never could get the snow off. Not that they wanted to keep it open year-round until 1932, but it would still last a long time. You move the highway over to here, now it's on the sunny side of the canyon, so it would be easier. The fact is, the roller pass was in operation in 46. Many people took it. Donners aren't going to have that luxury. They get there and everything's covered in snow, and all they can do, there's not going to be doing anything over anywhere outside of Coldstream Canyon or any of that. They're going to look right up at the west end. You see the lowest point, and they're going to make a beeline for that, because everything else would have been obliterated for them, There would have been, ground might have been clear of snow or just a little bit of snow at lake level, but as soon as you started going up into the elevation, they would have lost any trail. So we really couldn't say specifically, because when they finally were making all this stuff, they were well above the ground level, in all of their travel. But it would have been right in that same zone there, absolutely, where the China Wall is and everything. That whole topography's been changed because when they did all that blasting for the Transcontinental, it doesn't look the way it was then. Yes?
Where in the Bay Area is that cemetery?
Oak Hill Cemetery. I took that picture like 20 years ago. I want to think it's like South Bay, South San Jose. So I was pretty, thank you, South San Jose. Yeah, it's worth going to. I mean, because it's funny, whenever I see a cemetery, the older it is, the more I'm excited about it, because I look for people that I know. I write about these early events and these early pioneers, and we still have them around.
Any other questions? I'll turn it over to Deborah.
Oh.
Let's get this one first. Does it work? Here, use this.
Well,
I have heard that Marysville, California is named after one of the Donner Party.
You're right. The Marysville is named after, I think it was Mary Donner, one of the survivors, yeah. It's funny because in that Stevens party, in 44, one of the girls' babies that was born right at the summit in a winter survival encampment, and her name is Mary Yuba Murphy because she's born right on the South Fork of the Yuba River. I think first American born, if not in California, but definitely in the mountains, that's for sure. And we had a couple over here. Yes?
Thank you so much for coming today. Are
Certainly.
there any other writers in the group besides him? Your presentation is fabulous. I got here a half an hour late because we went to the gym and I saw the flyer
Oh.
about you in the gym.
Well, I'm glad you made it.
Yes, thank you. My question is technical. On page 168 of your marvelous book, you have a photo of the Hotel Raphael in San Rafael. And
It's a line sketch, isn't it?
yes, it's a black and white.
Yes.
I have a book coming out in about 6 weeks, and the Hotel Raphael is one of 5 grand hotels in California at the turn of the century that my grandparents frequented, and I won't tell you more about mine, but when you put this picture in from the UC Berkeley archives and said author's collection, did you have to pay anything for this or contact the
I
Berkeley?
couldn't tell you. You know what the best thing to do is shoot me an email and ask me,
I'd love to.
and then I'll go into my folder and I'll look at that
Perfect.
doc, and then I can tell you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming in.
Give us your name.
Oh, I'm Linda Williams, and the name of my book is 12 Cents for Special Delivery, California Love Letters, 1903 to 1905.
I wish you the best with your book, too. Congratulations. That's cool. One more question, looks like. Oh, maybe one more.
Does it work?
Hello? Was it Tamsin Donner that kept the best diaries, or it was a female I know that kept the best diaries of what was going on at the time, but I can't recall who that was.
We believe Tamsin Donner did keep a diary. It was never found. It either got exposed to water and decomposed, or it was used for fires and stuff like that. Her diary was never found. The most poignant diary that was kept during the event. Reed had a diary, came out way later. We don't know when he was writing it all. It was by that guy, Patrick Breen, the Irish Catholic guy. So he kept a diary all the way up till March 1 when he was rescued, something like that. And what was good for me about that diary, he wrote the weather conditions and the snow depth at the encampment. So since my book is focused on the story from the weather perspective, that was very helpful. But that's the only one that I know of that survived that was written during the event, for sure.
Okay.
So,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. And my dad, one more woman, right here. Oh, go. Okay. Oh.
I just want to speak to what you said about you have to be in their frame of mind.
Yes.
Years ago, I read Ordeal by Hunger.
Mm-hmm.
By the time they started cannibalism, your frame of mind was, it's about time.
Yeah.
There was a resource for you. And also I remember that one of the fathers told his daughters, this is all I have to give you, so when I go,
Yeah.
use me.
There's a lot of that we've developed over time. And one of the things when I try to cover this topic, I try to focus on the people and the positive aspects that they did to help others and for themselves and their own family too. But you're exactly right. I mean, it's a component of the story that will never go away in a sense. I just don't think it's the most important part of the story. But you're exactly right about the mental aspects of it. Sure. Yes.
My question is, are you related to the McGlashan that helped raise funds to make the monument?
Charles McGlashan?
Yes.
No. No. Our names are spelled different also. But I've written a lot about McGlashan. One of the things, I showed you a quick little slide of the pedestal that's 22.5 feet high, indicative of the snowpack. This woman brought up Charles McGlashan. He was kind of a founding patriarch of the town of Truckee, ran the Truckee Republican newspaper, he was a lawyer, school teacher, tremendous butterfly collection. He's got this world-class butterfly. It's been gone for a while. He has, but the collection's still around. And the thing is, for that pedestal, he had excavated where the Patrick Breen family cabin was, and he says, for the dedication plaque, he says, on this spot was the Breen cabin. When the plaque shows up from the foundry in Oakland, whoever got in charge of it, it said, in the very entry of it, it says, near this spot, not on this spot. And when McGlashan saw that, he grew so livid, he never went back to Donner Park again. That was it. He was that angry about it. But he was very influential. He's really the founder of our winter sports, too, for skiing. Oh, there's one of the little the jars with the little wood? That was one of the things he did in early archaeology on some of the cabins, and to fundraise, he took pieces of the wood of the original logs, put them in these little glass vials, and they would sell them for like $1 each, and raise the money to build the monument. Yeah.
And they found some of these in a old house in Nevada City, I think it was, up in an attic. And they took them over to the museum, and they were selling them for $20. And I wanted to get one, and my husband wouldn't let me.
Oh.
The next time we drove up, I said, "Stop at the museum, I'm getting one."
Well, that's the last time she listened to him.
We know that story.
Anybody else?
Any other question? Deborah, do you want to close it? Are we finished?
One more, got one gentleman right here. Right here.
Where's the hand? Here we go.
I'm kind of familiar with the Tahoe area. Was there any group of people living around Lake Tahoe at that time? It seems to me that Donner and Lake Tahoe is such a short distance. I don't know about in those back in.
Yeah, and the only people would have been Paiute and Washoe in the summer months, nobody in the winter. Tahoe City and Truckee both were founded in 1863. That's why we celebrated, both of them, we celebrated their 150th birthdays last year. Okay. There was a gold rush right at the mouth of Squaw Valley, and when all the miners realized it was a bust, they all left, and 4 of them settled in Tahoe City, became the first year-round people at Tahoe City. Glenbrook's probably the oldest settlement on the East Shore, and but when the Donners came through, nothing was going on. No.
Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure.
I just want to, can we get, yes, it was a fabulous, fabulous presentation. I'm sure you all enjoyed it. And I especially enjoyed it because I can't believe a Philadelphia boy knows that much about California. Incredible.